Welcome back, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and right now we are live in the Christopher Vasata trial. And this is an interesting moment that we're having right now because this man is accused of opening fire and killing 3 people at a house party at a Super Bowl Sunday party 2 years ago. What's happening right now is a forensic scientist is on the stand, called by the prosecution, and she is basically tying the defendant to key pieces of evidence in this case, namely a black hoodie, gloves, and a gun that were recovered near the getaway vehicle. His DNA was also found. Well, let me rephrase. The way they're tying is they're saying they can't definitively say it's his DNA. What they are saying is his DNA cannot be excluded, and the probability that it would be somebody else is more rare than 1 in 100, more than 1 in 300 billion. So you kind of get a sense of where they're going. So his DNA is being tied to these different pieces of evidence. The getaway car, we're going to go back live, and they're also tying the DNA of his co-defendant, Marcus Stewart. Let's go back. Oh boy, I feel like I'm in a math class that I don't want to be a part of. Joining me right now is Law&Crime trial analyst Gene Rossi to break down really what we should be focusing on in this case. Gene, it's great to have you here. And as we listen to this case, I know, oh boy, is definitely what I was feeling too. So let me ask you this. They're tying his DNA to these key pieces of evidence. What are you thinking about when you hear this? Does it really tell you anything?
Well, once my head stops spinning and I can think, what this tells me is the prosecutor should have had a chart that really made it simple. No disrespect to the forensic scientist. I'm not an arithmetic or math guy. I like things simple. But the punchline is this: there's a high likelihood that the people that have the DNA on these materials is probably likely the defendant and other people involved in the crime. That's the punchline.
And you tell me, even if they establish that, even if they say his DNA is on this Glock, it's on the car, it's on the hoodie, it's on the gloves,
right?
How do we know he's the one who shot these 3 people?
That's where the rubber meets the road. We don't, because it could have been just a shootout, and his defense is, I was there having a beer, enjoying myself, and these other people came, and they're the murderers, not me. And if there's residue on me or there's my fingerprints on a Glock, I was probably trying to defend myself. That's what I would be arguing as a defense attorney.
Well, if you were the defense attorney in this case, and after the conclusion of this math lesson right here and this scientific, forensic study here, what would you cross-examine her about? What would you want the jury to think about?
I got to tell you, Jesse, I'm pretty aggressive, but sometimes you don't need to cross this individual. It is what it is. His DNA, whether it's on it, likely on it, 100% on it, it doesn't matter what she says because you're embracing it. And I may not even cross this person.
Well, maybe that's what'll happen. The defense has been really strong so far in this case. Let's go back live and we'll learn more about what the state is trying to get out of this witness. All right, Gene, as they tie him to these different pieces of evidence, let's just talk overall. What do you think about this case? What do you think about a defendant who was shot himself, says he went to this party as an innocent person trying to calm down the fight that was happening, because not a fight, but a plan that there was tensions brewing between Charles Verpagel and another person, and he was an innocent party. What do you make of all this?
Well, what this testimony seems to do is put a hole, no pun intended, into the argument that Chris Vasata was just sitting there, an innocent person, the right person in the wrong place at the wrong time. This puts him at the scene of the crime, if you will, because they place his DNA on inculpatory items that may have been tools used to commit the crime. That is very bad. So what the defense has to do is possibly come up with a justification for why his DNA is on the tools of the crime. That's going to be hard.
Couldn't you say, hey, listen, none of these people were really that great. They're involved in illegal activity. He came there with weapons to protect himself, and things just took a turn. He went there to have a calm conversation, and things blew up. And then he ran out, jumped in that Honda. He gets shot. He's dropped at the BMW. Maybe there wasn't a plan to execute anyone at this party, but maybe just things took a really wrong turn. What do you think about that?
Well, Yes, but I got to tell you, this to me looks like a home invasion. I prosecuted one of these where a drug dealer's at home. He has guns, cash, and drugs, and a rival drug dealer comes in and does a home invasion to get drugs, cash, and guns. This is what it looks like. So Vasata seems to be the person allegedly that entered the home. He was part of that home invasion in home invasion group.
Now, that's interesting you say that about a ton of drugs and guns that were found at Charles Verpagel's house, because you mentioned how it could work to the prosecution's advantage. But couldn't it work for the defense and say, this guy who's going to be the star witness for the state, who's already in prison for federal drug and weapons charges, he has this whole cachet of illegal things going on. What do you think?
Absolutely. We had the same issue in my home invasion trial. One of the victims was this guy that I'll call Mr. V. One of the victims in our case was just like him. He was a drug dealer. He was at home. He had guns, drugs, and cash. And he got invaded by two other people and they almost killed him. So we put him on as a victim. And we said to the jury essentially, hey, just because he was up to no good, the victim, doesn't justify the rival drug dealers to try to kill him and beat him up and actually beat up a fellow renter. First name was Zella.
Right.
And she was just an innocent person, and she was beat up too.
Well, maybe that's the same kind of thing we'll see when he ultimately testifies.
Yes.
That's what I'm waiting for in this trial. Okay, Gene, seems like they laid out a pretty good story, multiple players here. I'm wondering, the more complicated it is, the more players you have, is that better for the defense?
Yes. You want simplicity. Prosecutors should never make a case complicated. The old saying, keep it simple, stupid. The KISS principle, I got to say, that prosecutor has an excellent style, no PowerPoint, no fancy charts, very rarely looked at her notes. She's having a conversation with a jury. That is the best way to do an opening or a closing.
Now, tell me if I'm wrong about this, because I keep reading more about the case. I'm trying to follow everything. If I was sitting on the jury and ultimately we come to the decision to convict this man, this is a death penalty eligible case. The idea of complications and really what happened, who was involved, what happened, does that affect the penalty phase? And again, the reason I ask that is we just covered a clear-cut case of Timothy Jones Jr., who was convicted of killing his children. The jury recommended the death penalty, clear-cut. What do you think about this one?
Oh, I firmly believe, and I've supervised indirectly death penalty cases, watched a ton. If you have a relatively weaker case in the guilt phase, like Charles Merritt's case,
right,
and Timothy Jones, I mean, there's an issue of whether he has the mental capacity, even though they found both of them guilty. That will permeate and go into the penalty phase, because I can't believe that a jury is going to not discuss, you know what, we found this guy guilty of Merritt, but I got to tell you, there's a couple of guys, you know, that wasn't done by himself. We had this Dan guy. I can see a jury talking about that. Let's give him life. Timothy Jones, they're probably saying, you know what? We found him guilty, but there's something not right with this guy. We're just going to give him life.
Well, that didn't happen. They ultimately recommend the death penalty for him. But well, I know you didn't know that, Gene. So I'm just telling you now. Yeah, they had no sympathy for that guy. Straightforward case about a father who killed his kids, and they had no sympathy for him there. What I do want to show, though, is a little bit more of the prosecution's opening statement in this case, how they lay out all the evidence against the defendant. Now, Gene, we've talked about this before. I want to talk about it again. You have to believe the state's key witness is Charles Verpagel, the person who hosted this party. He himself is in prison on federal weapons and drug charges. If you're the defense attorney, what are you going to be looking out for this guy? I mean, what do you really want to point the finger at him with? I mean, really, the whole case may rest on his testimony.
If you can beat up the credibility of Charles V. and diminish his testimony, then the only evidence the prosecutors have is the DNA evidence on the incriminating items that committed the crime. And then you're going to have to ask the jury to draw these strong inferences. If they don't believe him, that's going to be harmful. In the case that I had, the guy in the house who was a drug dealer and was a victim, he did an excellent job, and they didn't attack his credibility that much. And we had another victim. Her name was Zella, and she was phenomenal. They don't have a Zella here. So this whole case relies on Charles V. If his credibility is tarnished, the prosecution has a much tougher case.
And they've already been kind of crumbling at his testimony a little bit. They had a CSI on the other day and said, okay, you looked at all these items of evidence. Well, where are the masks? And she goes, what masks? I didn't find any masks. And the reason that's important is because he originally said that masked men came to his house and opened fire. So we're already getting a sense of them tarnishing his credibility. Now, Gene, I want you to stand by because we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to switch gears and we're going to go back and talk about Timothy Jones Jr. with the latest development from yesterday. Stay tuned.